Awesome. Hi, everyone. Thank you so kindly for joining us. Welcome to Green Apple Books on the Park. My name is Cara Johnson. I'm the event coordinator for Green Apple. And tonight I am delighted to welcome Jody Servon and Lorene Delany-Ullman for a celebration of their book, Saved, Objects of the Dead. Let's give a hand for both of them. I usually don't editorialize when we do book events. I usually let the authors come up and speak for themselves, and I assure you that they will. But I just wanted to say that I'm really glad to have Jody and Lorene here because I think this project is really important, and it's really moving. It captures really beautifully what is left and what an object is imbued with somebody's memory after they've left us. And I found myself really tearing up at some of the prose that accompanies these images and looking at the photographs and their stunning detail. And I'm just really glad to be spending the evening with both of you and with all of you here. So thank you for joining us. I appreciate you joining us both in person here and online. Hello, online audience. We appreciate you. We are broadcasting from San Francisco. We are on unceded Ramaytush Ohlone land, and we hope that you join us in our pledge to turn land acknowledgement into action by donating either your time or monetary means to an Indigenous organization every time you hear a land acknowledgement. I have a very brief business before we get to the heart of the evening. Now's a good time to silence your cell phones if you have not already. I would say picture taking is encouraged, but you can ask our visiting artists about that. Please do check out our event calendar on our website. We are closing out. I can't believe, I'm so sorry to tell you that time keeps marching forward and we are nearing the end of 2023. But we're almost done with our event calendar for 2023. And do check out what we have left in the year and what we have coming up in 2024. The restroom is behind us. It is available after the event and not during the event for obvious reasons. If you need to know how to get there, do ask me and I will show you. We have copies of Saved available for purchase at the front register. You can find them there. I think it's safe to say that you too would sign them. Awesome. So they're willing to sign books afterward. That would be great. If you've been here before, you've definitely heard me say that when you buy books from us, not only do you support us as an independent bookstore, you support the authors who put so much work into making this book, and then you get to have a book, which might be the best part. So if you are able, we always appreciate it. Thank you so kindly. Without further ado, I'm going to go ahead and introduce the two folks who are joining us this evening. First, Lorene Delany-Ullman's book of prose poems, Camouflage for the Neighborhood, won the 2011 Sentence Award and was published by Firewheel Editions. Her poems have been included in the anthologies Orange County, a literary field guide, Beyond Forgetting, Poetry and Prose about Alzheimer's Disease, and Alternatives to Surrender. She recently published her poetry in Citric Acid, Zocalo, Public Square, and Tab. Delany-Ullman received an MFA in English from the University of California at Irvine. She is a lecturer at UC Irvine's Department of English and teaches composition. Let's give another hand for Lorene Delany-Ullman. Jody Servon creates collaborative and socially engaged projects encouraging public interaction and personal exploration. Her projects have been included in museum and gallery exhibitions and public projects in North America, Europe, and China. Servon's writing and or art have been featured in New American Paintings, Emergency Index, Kakalak, and Artful Dodge. Her collaborative work with Lorene Delany-Ullman has been published in Agni, Tupelo Quarterly, Lunch Ticket, and Purple and Sky. Reviews and articles on her projects have been in the New York Times, Miami Herald, the Los Angeles Times, and elsewhere. She is currently a professor and coordinator of the Art Management Program at Appalachian State University in North Carolina. Let's give a hand for Jody Servon. I'll let you two take it away.
Is it okay if I move this a little bit?
Sure. Already moved on.
Thank you, Car. Car, you've been a dream to work with on
Yes.
organizing this and for hosting us. So we really appreciate Green Apple and all of you for coming out tonight, especially with APEC being here and all the warnings about traffic. It's nice to see people in the audience. So thank you so much. We're going to exchange throughout the night, but if there's a time where you feel like you have a question or something that you want to contribute, feel free. This is, a gathering to kind of share ideas, and we'll also talk about our project. When people die, there are a few places they can live on, but in art and in the minds of those who knew them. And we approached Saved Objects as a photographic and poetic exploration of the objects people saved, from people they loved that have passed on, and the memories that they had about them. It's a collaborative work not only between us as artist and author, but also the people who lent us all of these objects, and the embarrassing, funny, and intimate stories that they've shared with us. I think it's been really powerful for us to connect with them and the ways in which they remember the people that they've lost. We believe that this project gives people a voice beyond their death, and they can live on through the stories and the memories. And a person that was influential for me was David Eagleman, who's a neuroscientist, and he talks about the 3 deaths that we have. There's the one where we take our last breath, and then he writes about the next one being when we're consigned to the grave. And I like to think about it maybe a little bit more expansively, because not everybody goes to a grave. And then when your name is spoken for the last time. And this book gives people a way to live on beyond that last mention of your name. So what we thought we would do was kind of intersperse some poetic pieces in between our talking. So Lorene's going to start by reading 2 of the pieces that are in the book.
Alan's hairbrush. It was genetics. Alan had good hair. He never left the house without his hair brushed into place and sprayed. His wife Grace claims that Alan had this Avon hairbrush longer than her, more than 25 years. Though Grace loved his salt and pepper hair, Alan applied Grecian Formula 16 when he grayed more than he liked. The Grecian liquid left a gunky coating on the prongs. He'd pull his hair out of the brush, but never washed it. That was Grace's job. She'd dig the caked formula off the plastic tines with her fingernails. She tried to replace Alan's brush with a new one, but he never used it. Grace uses Alan's hairbrush every day. She thinks his and her strands of hair commingle between the bent prongs. She's selling the rest of his stuff on eBay. Gunga's lamps. No harp or finial, no shade or socket, no light. The colonial figurines posed on the dresser in the front bedroom. Because Gunga kept old toys, General Custer, the $6 Million Man, and Rock'em Sock'em robots, her granddaughter Blair liked to make the lamps dance, would press the well-dressed courting couples together, the foursome a frolic in her imagination. She was careful with the glazed porcelain, the hand-painted gold accents, their delicate boudoir fleeces. They had been table lamps, but good for girly play. Everything Gunga touched, her family wanted to save, but things had to be divided up before the painful yard sale. On a cloudless weekend, Gunga's objects were sold. Big-ticket items, the good stuff, now free of sentiment. Every Christmas, Blair's brother prepares cherries in the snow, an exclusive Gunga recipe. Pound cake, cherries, cherry goo, and Cool Whip.
But I just realized when you read those 2 pieces of both of them, we're talking about selling objects, right? We haven't read these 2 pieces in consecutive order in a while, so it's kind of interesting to hear about the ways in which we disperse those things, right? There's the things that we hold on to and the things that we let go, and then the memories that are imbued in all of them. This project started after my dad and 3 of my friends died within the same year. I really looked differently around the way that people leave us and the things that they leave behind and the meanings that they have, right? Like there's the things that take on such potency after people leave, and all you have left are these objects. And I also was walking around with this immense grief and realizing that when you're walking down the street or down the hallway, people don't know what you're carrying, right? And they'll say, like, how are you doing? And that, ubiquitous question doesn't have much meaning when you say fine and you keep going. And I stopped saying fine, and I stopped saying good, and I started answering honestly. And it opened up a whole world to me about people who had lost loved ones and who were experiencing this, and they were sharing things that I had never known about them, right? And there were people that I had known for a really long time. There was an instance where a person that I worked with, I said, I'm not doing well. This person had died. And she said, oh, when my brother died. And I had no idea that she had a brother. And she told me about the car accident. And all of these kinds of ways that these connections started to happen were really powerful for me. And as an artist, right, what do you do with this? What do you do with these emotions, and how do you work through it? And I started, I'd had made a photograph earlier with a photographer that I collaborate with, Troy Tuttle. And it was of my grandfather's dentures. And there was something about these teeth that really had his life and his mouth and his presence for me. And it was before I had done this project, but it was something about those objects as thinking about him as a stand-in for him. And when I was deeply grieving, I went back to Troy and I started talking about making some photographs with objects that other people had saved. So it wasn't people in my family. Nobody in the book is from my family. It was all people in the community that surrounded me, and then Lorene when she joined the project. But what happened was I developed this very different relationship with the people who surrounded me, but then also going into the studio with Troy was a way to work through the process of grieving. So I would bring these objects like a prosthetic leg and forks from a man whose dad was in the SS, and I was able to share these stories with him while we were making the images, and it was a kind of place to feel like I was going home and feeling like I was able to talk about all of this and make art that I had no idea what was going to happen with it, right? I was just kind of working through and feeling like I was able to connect with the people that were surrounding me and bring their objects and then share a photo with them. And that's all that was happening. It was just kind of working through a process. And I showed the work in a few places. There was a gallery, 5 and 40 in Winston-Salem, that took on about 20-some pieces, and that was in 2008. And I was struggling with how to tell the stories, right? So I had this series of photographs, and you can see that they're really spare. There was purposely no background. It was when you see the detail, if you look in the book, that much better than the projection, image quality, that there's a focus on the wear of the items. So all of these things are used, all of them are cared for. There's fingerprints, there's things that are rubbed off, there's in one of the prosthetic leg, there's a hole in the nylon, right? There's this intentionality with removing all of the background, because that setting would lead us places. That would take us in different kinds of ways. And what I really wanted to have it was really thinking about the objects as a holding space for these memories, but then the stories weren't there. So, people see like, oh, it's a beautiful, it looks like it's a shadow box of a Boy Scout shirt, but what is it about this Boy Scout shirt that should be special? So I was at the Vermont Studio Center, and that's where I met Lorene when I was talking about about the project.
So as part of the residency, she was presenting slides very similar to the ones that we're looking at now. I was sitting in the audience, and she was talking about some of the stories. She would relate some of the stories that she knew for each of the items, and she really had, I think, less than 5 minutes up there. And I was immediately drawn to the photographs and to the stories, and she kind of hinted that, she didn't have a way to tell the stories, but she was trying to figure that out. And so after the presentation was kind of traditional, we would go to the bar next door. And I went over there and approached her and literally completely out of my comfort zone. In fact, one of my friends calls this the story of my assertion. Is I went over to her table and I said, I can write those stories for you. Did not know her at all, basically. And so that was towards the beginning of the residency. We were both there for a month. And we would meet occasionally and kind of have dinner and get to know each other a little bit. It wasn't really until the very last day of the residency that we sat down to figure out how we were going to collaborate. So we came up with interview questions, 3 interview questions that we would ask each of the people who had lent the objects to Jody to make the images. And that was pretty much it for the residency. And so she started sending out the interview questions as soon as she returned back to Boone, North Carolina. And I live in Newport Beach, California. So we're doing this whole collaboration across the country. And at that time, we only had email, basically. Not much texting going on. And so slowly but surely the interview information came in, and she had given me a file with all the images so I could look at the image and look at the interview material and then choose and select what I was going to write in terms of the piece. So that process was very different for me than my typical process of writing poetry or prose poetry. I typically write prose poetry. Because the material was so rich with details, and these were somebody else's details. And in some ways what helped was that I did not know these people, although Jody did. That helped me kind of distance myself, yet I still had to kind of immerse myself in their sadness, essentially, into their situation, because each one, of course, was unique and had its own kind of information that I would want to utilize. So I kind of looked for the best pieces, the best words, the best phrases. I tried to use the language very often that was a part of the interview, like pet names or nicknames or phrases that were really interesting. I tried to keep the humor, if there was some humor in the interview that came through. That was always kind of a goal, definitely. And then also just thinking about the writing process in terms of not being too sentimental, not being cliche, thinking about, well, there's the eulogy, there's the other elegy, there's the obituary, so all these other kinds of forms that actually people turn to for a reason, because they are a form and they do help you do that kind of writing. But I wanted to get away from that. I wanted to do something slightly different than that. So it took about a year for me to write a good number of the pieces, probably about 30 of them at the time. And that's kind of how we started, basically. So we've been collaborating since 2009.
And I think when Lorene approached me with saying that she was a poet, I am not well read in poetry and wasn't sold on that being a way for the stories to be communicated, and that's due to my lack of knowledge in that way of writing. And then Lorene gave me some pieces. I was like, well, I'd like to see your work. And there was a way that your work, the spareness and the way that the language was so pointed and directed and powerful, that I really connected with her work. And I think in part was because you gave me a piece about your ex-mother-in-law's murder, and there was a way that you had talked about curtains flapping in a van on the way on a drive, and Cheeto stained fingers, and there was just a way that the storytelling in the prose pieces that you shared with me really felt like that they could work with the images. So I think that was something that made it feel like we could kind of dip our toe into collaborating, right? And now this many years later, right, we learned so much about each other through this process, and our families are going to spend Thanksgiving together for the first time ever this year. And it's like, instead of just thinking about the community of grievers, right, we've moved for this process of grief ourselves and all of the people that we've lost during this time.
Yeah. And I think one of the most interesting times for us was our first show, which was literally less than a year after we had met, and we were literally strangers but sharing the same B&B room, and it was like, I don't even know this person that I'm staying with. It was kind of an odd moment.
In a small town in Pennsylvania, right? Like, so she'd flown across the country, and then we were like sleeping in the same room, eating all our meals together, going to a gallery at, was it Bloomsburg University, I think? Yeah. And so like just the way that we've connected through this project has been really lovely. I think you're going to read a few more pieces. Yeah.
Daddy's leg. Amputate, to cut away what can't be spared. Once he recovered from surgery, Daddy was fitted with several legs. When the stump healed, a permanent leg was made for him. A meticulous man, he played a ruthless game of gin rummy and walked well with a prosthetic limb. No one who watched him knew. Daddy had other uses for his leg. At the park, it became a pillow as he napped under a tree, soft foam and fabric beneath his head. At the opera, he removed his leg and let it rest on the seat beside him. He'd ask folks to wait while he joined leg to stump. After his wife died, he cooked for himself and made a mess every time. His daughter joked she'd turn his leg into a vacuum cleaner. He could cook and suck up the crumbs, too. Now that Daddy's gone, she's thought of turning his leg into a lamp. Uncle Ebby and Uncle Reese's slot machine. On their bar beside the bourbon and vodka, the slots, and a crock of buffalo nickels. Uncle Ebby, he'd always tell you what he thought, good or bad. That's a decorator for you. Uncle Reese, he used to relax with a Pall Mall and a vodka tonic before cooking. He'd set the table with the best china, silver, and crystal. Wine with dinner and a stinger afterward. Their 7-year-old niece played the slots, a green machine with 3 spinning reels out of Atlantic City. She'd spend summers in their central AC, watch their TV with more than 3 channels. Every Christmas, the uncles had 2 trees, one full of antique ornaments, the other upstairs, white flocked with red velvet ribbons and birds. Ever the gift, the winter coats for her and her brothers. Later, she'd stand at the bar drinking quinine, sliding the coins into the slot. Bell fruit, bell fruit, bell fruit, jackpot.
So these last 2 are examples of objects that, when I was carrying them to and from the studio, were ones that gathered more attention than other ones. The slot machine is really heavy, and you can see that it's filled with coins. So it was something that was really bulky, all metal, and I believe that I was able to get some other people to participate in the project by them just seeing me carrying a leg and saying, like, why are you carrying a prosthetic leg around? Because, you know, it would be something that I would take from my office to the studio, and then from the studio back to the person. It was a woman who was taught sculpture, lent me the leg. And then the slot machine, I would have to drive and double park because I couldn't carry it that far because it was so heavy. So things like that also were conversation starters with people. And I'd say, look, I'm working on this project about grief and about loss and making these images with Troy. And I think that the one of the things that this project has really taught me is that that we're not alone with our grief, in whatever stage that we're at. When somebody you love dies, you always carry that grief with you, right? That there's always something, that there's not, you get beyond it, right? It's always there, and you learn how to deal with it differently, and you kind of think about the ways in which it's changed your life, right? Like we have now these kinds of markers, right? Like before and after the pandemic, and before and after, and I feel like loss has those markers for us. And, you know, growing up, my parents were really generous with their community, and they would often give lots of time to people who had died, right? They would make food, and they would attend the services and all of those things, and you would send cards and, you know, be the support for those people. And I had this notion of, you still do that, but then also, but there was a time limit to when you would bring up the people, right? Like, why would you send a card a year after somebody has passed? Because that, like, you don't want to bring that up. What if it's a day where they don't want to feel that grief? And then I realized after I went through the process of losing so many people that it's never too late to send the card. It's never too late, right? Like, you always feel happy to have somebody know that person or remember that person, even if it's a day where you might not want to experience that memory at that moment. That person never leaves you. And I think that that's been something that's been really a lesson for me in thinking about how to support people who are grieving and who have loss, is to acknowledge it, to say their name, and to show that we care, right, as individuals and as a community. And I think that the project has kind of given us a way to not only think about the objects and the ways in which they're so powerful as memory markers, but also opening up a community online. And
So after a while, we decided that we couldn't carry around objects anymore and take images of them. The book could only go so far. So we began a online project called Saved Objects, and it's on Instagram and Facebook. And so it's really a forum for anyone who wants to contribute an image of an object and a little story or a poem, however they want to write about it, in relationship to the loss that that object represents. And try to build this community in which people can share their memories in an open and loving way that social media does actually offer to us. And there's been some good response and some really touching stories. I mean, they just range from car keys to boots. I mean, one of the very first submissions was from one of my girlfriends whose father had died when she was quite young, and she still had his boots, and so she took a photo of that, and she wrote a paragraph basically, and about how special those boots were to her, and I didn't even know that she still had them, so that was a real revelation for me. But we're hoping that people will continue to submit, and certainly everyone in this room is invited to do so.
yeah, there's an invitation in the back of the book, and we put some cards out by the drinks and at the front desk. But I think that there's been such moving things that we don't know, right? So the project is all inclusive of people that we've known or have been introduced to by somebody who participated in the project. But the online component has kind of opened up a way for other people to connect and share their stories. There's a list that a son kept of things that he loved that his parents found after he passed away. And it's written in different pens and things are crossed out, and there's it's really a beautiful reminder for them of his hand and his mind and things that he cared about, right? Like if you imagine anybody that you've loved who's lost, if you had that list, that handwritten list, that I think that was something that his mother shared with us. And then another thing in the book is we wanted to invite other people whose work that we really cared about, whether they were authors or artists, to contribute an image of something that they've saved in their own writing about it. So there's 5 people, from Leslie Gray Streeter to Sonia Clark, Alex Espinoza, Erika Hayasaki, and Swati Karana. And they all have different kinds of ways that they've processed their memories and shared their images, so that's their hand and their writing in the book. That was really lovely for us to get to collaborate and include them in the project as well. You want to read another piece?
Yeah. Mom's chili cup. In her cookbooks, hundreds of dog-eared recipes, or sometimes she wrote on strips of paper, "I like this because." Everybody thought she was a redhead. She was the cool mom on the block with shades and wigs. She cooked her favorite 5, though her son only remembers 3. Hawaiian pork chops, chuck wagon mac, and barbecued spare ribs. How he hated Hawaiian pork chop meat. Even Mom's ribs weren't that good. God bless her. The first meal she cooked for her husband, chicken a la king, she crushed the whole garlic bulb into the skillet instead of 1 clove. Mom believed in recipes, the microwave and Wendy's chili. Belly up to a pot of rich and meaty award-winning taste. She'd buy 4 or 5 cups and keep them in the refrigerator. In the new condo, she never turned on the oven. Her son found a broiler pan still wrapped inside.
And this is an image of an item kept by Troy Tuttle, the photographer that I worked with on this project. And it's something that often gathers lots of questions about why somebody would save a Wendy's chili cup. But when you read the piece, right, like when you see all of these objects from a watch to, right, things that you would expect somebody to save that feels like a family heirloom, this is one that's a little bit more unique, and he has it in a special place in his house. There was the cups of chili and some beer in her refrigerator when she passed. But things like that, right, like get us to know people in a whole new way. So we think that this would be a good opportunity to hear if there's things that people have saved, or if you have questions, or open it up to a little bit more of a conversation.
I think it's very interesting listening to your book talk. When my father died 10 years ago, saved a lot of important papers and objects, but for some reason I took his hairbrush, and I don't know why. It's been sitting shoved in the far back of a drawer in my bathroom. I don't know what to do with it, but you mentioned about the hairs combing. That's pretty interesting. I don't know if I've ever actually brushed my hair with that brush. I'm really inspired to do that when I get home.
So there's the hairbrush in the book, but there were two things that I'd made photographs of before this project. And one was my grandfather's dentures, which I can tell you the story about that in a second. But the other was my dad's hairbrush. So we got to pick after my dad passed, and what are the things that you want the most? And I have two sisters, and it's like, well, who wants what, and are they going to want the thing that I want, right? Like you get these attachments to things, and I wanted my dad's hairbrush, and fortunately neither of them wanted that. And I kept it there. He had a very particular smell, right? Like we all do. But I keep it in a Ziploc bag to preserve the smell, so it still has that kind of aroma of him, which my children think is kind of creepy. But they live with lots of odd things that I have around the house, like my grandfather's dentures. And that was, my Aunt Peggy was going through my grandfather's house in Arizona, and I had done a project with a lot of what other people might consider strange objects previously, called Items Matching Art. And she had come to my MFA thesis show and then was going through my grandfather's house, and she said, I don't know what to do with these things. Oh, I'll mail the dentures to my niece Jody. And she didn't tell me that they were coming, so I get this package in the mail, and I open it, and there's a set of teeth. And it was one of the strangest things that I've ever received. So like the teeth are in the little box that she sent, it's a little gold box, jewelry box that she sent them to me in. And then my dad's hairbrush that I don't use, actually, I don't use it either. I haven't thought about. It's also like a man's bristle brush, and I don't really have brushable hair. But the commingling, when you wrote about that with Grace, and also I had that kind of brush, right? When I was growing up, you'd stick it in your back pocket, and you would sit on it, and it would get all bent.
Grace actually still does use that brush. She still uses it.
I didn't think to put this into a plastic bag, though, to preserve the scent. That's pretty interesting.
Yeah, there was something, like, my dad had this, like, cologne-ish kind of, cheap cologne. There was never nice stuff. Like, there was the Old Spice phase, and there was the Rango phase, which was one of our favorite phases, because we liked saying Rango. We're buying it for him for, like, wherever, like, drugstore you would get that at. But
Yeah, there's a piece in the book that's an Avon gold Cadillac, and I always think about that piece because smell is such a potent memory trigger for many, many people. And, it seems like eventually the cologne would probably go bad in some way and maybe not smell the same, but holding on to that smell that's like really hard to do, actually.
yeah, the trunk twists off, so you can open up the bottle. That's a favorite one.
You think, especially these days with this online database and this online input that people can now, from all over, can share their stories, do you think that it helps you broaden your perspective on processing grief, hearing from this multi-generational input?
It definitely has for me. I was one of those people that would have said fine for the rest of my life, probably, if somebody asked me how I was feeling after, I lost my father or my mother. this project really has opened that up for me, and Jody has been instrumental in really teaching me that the more that you can have a conversation, the better it is for everyone, really. And not just, it's just that the grief closes people down very often. And when they really often want to share but are afraid to, is this the right moment? Can I talk about it now? How long can I talk about it? And as she has said previously, and I think which is totally true, there's no timeline for grief. I think previously we, in some cases, maybe had learned that there was some specific time, we had stages, and that's really been kind of put aside at this point, I think, based on how I feel about this project, is that there is no timeline. It is something that you will go through up and down, and the more that you can share that with people and understand that other people are going through that, and I think that's the important thing, is that you're not alone. You're honestly not alone. And to me, that's really been such a gift for this project.
And I think when I started, Instagram and some of the social media sites weren't being used in the same kind of way, but I taught at a university, and I was in my 30s, and so the age difference between some of my students wasn't that great, and it enabled me to connect with them in a different kind of way. So Gunga's Lamps is one of my former students. She was a student at the time, and was able to tell me about not only her grandmother, but her dad had passed away, and she was able to tell me about that experience, and it's her dad's Boy Scout shirt that's in the book. And so there was that kind of way to get to know my own community, but then there's ways that people are posting and sharing that feels more comfortable than potentially talking. And there's been some students of yours that have posted that may never tell the story. And I think that's part of the way that we have different comfort levels with what we reveal in an intimate setting, what we reveal in a public setting, and some of the things that people have shared with us when we give talks, and we have been doing this for a number of years now. The grief can be palpable. There's many occasions where people are, talking to us with tears streaming down their face, telling a story about grief that has just happened. There's a recent post on Saved Objects by somebody who showed up to an event soon after the loss of their father and was dealing with lots of processing of items, and then now has a little bit of distance from that, months, right? And shared their father's record collection and what that meant for them. So I think that it gives people time and space. It might not be something that somebody's comfortable saying now, but they could, in a year from now, come back to it. And it's a opportunity that we hope will continue to grow. It's really hard sometimes, I think, for people to do both, right? Sometimes people are more comfortable writing or making images, but to do both feels like that there's some stakes in getting it right. And I think when things go out into the world, right, you can reveal yourself in a way that you might want to take back too, right? So I think people are sometimes cautious about posting. But yeah, I definitely feel like it has expanded what we've been able to do, right? There's something really lovely about the book as an object and as a place, as a repository, and we're hoping to launch a campaign to get it into as many libraries as possible, so that way it's as accessible as possible to a wide range of people. But the accessibility of Instagram and online places, I think, is really different.
What has surprised you through all these years of doing this project, that a particular kind of item like hairbrushes or something that repeats, or maybe something else that you've learned about the process of grief that seems maybe non-intuitive in retrospect?
There certainly have been some repeats. I mean, like rings. We have two rings in the book, actually.
Right, and we have to been close proximity.
We kept them next to each other for a reason. I mean, people do share heirlooms quite a bit, or keep heirlooms, obviously. But I'm trying to think of, I'm not sure in terms of, I kept my dad's hammer, and partly was inspired by the fact that we have a hammer in the book. But I knew it was the thing that I wanted because his hands had been on it. And I think the thing that has surprised me the most in terms of grief is that if you offer a conversation, people will actually start talking about it. And that to me was kind of revelatory because I didn't want to talk about it. I'm one of those people that did not want to talk about it. And, you know, I have a number of friends, Grace actually, who has actually lost 2 partners, her husband and a second partner. And I was, you know, how do I even talk to her? She's going through this grief. Well, she's one of my closest friends. I've known her for 30 years, so of course I should be open to having a conversation with her, but it was really hard. So this has really helped me just understand that people that you know, we have to go through this process. It's just a continual thing.
I think for me it was how put together we may seem, but how messy our lives are. I think that was the big thing, is just that the grief that we carry, the losses that are part of our lives are so present in us. And I don't think I realized that, right? Because you can see everybody just kind of moving through their existences. And then once you touch that spot, that soft spot, it flows open in a lot of ways. And I think that that's something that really surprised me. And just how caring people are about each other. There was a time we spoke at a museum in Seattle, and there were 2 people that were in the audience that spoke about different losses, and we had a cake that people shared after, and they kind of like just joined up and started sharing this conversation and cake, and it was like they were strangers that had talked about different experiences that they had with losing people. And I think that that's something that that we can be strangers and connect over this in ways that I didn't really imagine. And that's been really surprising, is that, you know, you might not tell somebody your last name, but you're going to tell them about the person that you loved and lost. And that's been really magical. And I think we feel really privileged to be able to do this project and to have the trust of the people who have shared these things with us. Anybody have anything that they've saved?
I'm sorry if I'm asking you to repeat something that you've already said, but can you maybe remind us or tell us for the first time what the questions were that you asked?
Yes, I actually usually bring them with me because
It was really short.
it was.
We didn't have a lot of questions.
No, there's 3 questions. Describe any distinguishing characteristics or traits of the person. Describe your relationship to him or her, or they, and to this object. What makes this object special to you? And then describe 1 or 2 memorable occasions or events you shared with this person. Now, there were occasions where people did not write enough, and I would kind of panic and send Jody an email and say, we need to get more information. So I would kind of prompt a little bit more information from what I had gotten. There were other people that we went kind of through a review process with them. We would send them the image and the piece that I had written to get a approval, essentially. So there were a few people that asked for revisions, and I was very reluctant to do that, but I did follow through eventually with a little bit of coaching from Jody. And then sometimes they didn't even answer the questions, which that's common. I teach composition, so I know that for a fact. It's very easy not to answer the question. And then, you know, some people would write a lot where it would be too much. I would have to really pare it down. And I tried to make them around 200 words each. I didn't want to have differences in length in too many pieces. So they're all roughly around the same word count. So I kind of gave myself some parameters in terms of doing the writing, which is very helpful, actually. And then, you know, I was writing more prose, just trying to incorporate some poetic elements, obviously, with language and cadence, and if I could.
One of the questions earlier was about something that surprised you, and I think that I could prompt you for something that I think was really surprising when we were talking about the process was the relationship with the people and how important that was. Because you were so separate from everybody. So like the people that are represented in the book are people that I see at work and I see at the farmer's market and I see in multiple settings. And it's complicated, right? Like if this person is your supervisor at work and you're having an issue, but then you're also doing this creative project that involves them, and then you see them at the grocery store, and right, like it's very deep and heavy for me, not just in terms of the grief and loss, but also the relationships and how I move through community. And then Lorene doesn't know the majority of the people. And getting to the book phase.
Yeah, getting to the book phase was a little bit more difficult because there were revisions that needed to happen. We had an editor who actually asked for some revisions as well, which was a new process for me. But it made, I mean, Jody and I had numerous Zoom conferences over the pandemic because that's really when the bulk of the book was occurring. And I mean, we had a 6-hour Zoom one time, long Zoom. And it finally occurred to me that through our conversation was that she was very attached to these people and I wasn't, and that's why I was having trouble doing the revisions because I was so attached to the work that I had done. So it really helped me to finally get to that point where, oh, yeah, these are real people to her. And then when we did the book launch, I actually met quite a few of them, and that actually made a huge difference to me. It literally would bring tears to my eyes to meet these people. There are a few people in the book that I actually do know that are in California. We did try to add a few pieces that were from the West Coast. But it was originally that distance, actually, I think that helped in the beginning to write them. But in the revision process, I needed to understand that these were real people and they needed that one little word to be changed that I didn't want to change.
I cried.
Yeah, she did. I was gonna say that. Yeah, she cried. She cried, and I was like, "Oh, she's crying. Okay, now I get it."
I'll share an object that I have that came to mind looking at this. So, when I graduated from college, I'm going to call him an uncle, but he's really a friend of my father's, his neighbor growing up, gave me this kind of little vase with, I want to say, like 20 tiny little origami, like paper boats in it, and a letter saying how proud he was that I was graduating college. He said, this guy, like, I don't know, he was my dad's neighbor, and I see him every now and then. And it wasn't until he passed last year of cancer, still, in his 50s, 60s, relatively young. And I saw the grief that my father and his brothers went through, where I realized, oh, they have, like, this isn't about me, this is about them. And, he has known my father since he was, that big, and so it's so much more about them than me, and it made me view that object in a completely different way. And I have it on my dresser, I see it every day, and I see it very differently,
That's really beautiful.
That is. I mean, it's such a realization in terms of, you need to be there for them as well. Yeah.
And how they cared about each other, right? As neighbors and friends, and that's. My dad grew up in a neighborhood where his friends early in his life were the same friends when he died, and having those times with them, right? Like there's a little thing that kind of takes me to the storytelling, right? All of the ways that they've shared time and space with each other. Yeah, it's magical. That feels like that could be a good place to end, and we're happy to share more conversation, intimately. If you'd like to get a book, we welcome you to do that. We also have our website has a place where you can link to the Participate and find out more about the project, because it's also a exhibition that travels. It's been lots of places throughout the U.S. But thank you so much for coming, and thank you to Green Apple and Carr and everybody for hosting us. This has been really lovely.
Yes, thank you very much, Carl.
both. Can we give one more hand for Lorene and Jody? Thank you both so much. I've been really looking forward to this, and I'm really glad to have you here, and I'm glad to be here with all of you this evening. I am just here to reiterate what these two just said, is we have copies of Saved at the front register. You can find them there, and please do talk to these fabulous people. They're here, and it's very special to have them here in the Bay Area. If you have any questions about the store or anything, please let me know, and if not, I will see you next time. Thank you so much.